Can you hear me? Okay, good. So, Indiana Jones. There's a scene in The Last Crusade, right at the beginning, where Indiana is standing in front of his class. And his class is full of sort of doughy-eyed college girls who are, staring at Harrison Ford with dreamy eyes going, "Oh, Harrison." And as they're looking at him, he's telling them the difference between philosophy and archaeology. And he stands there and he's like, "This class is not about truth. This is about fact. Archaeology is about fact. If you want truth, go to the philosophy classroom, because this is about fact. Archaeology is about research, it's about studying, it's about reading books, and X never marks the spot." The funny thing is, obviously the irony, is about half an hour later in the film, he's there in a Crusader church and X, right there on the floor, marks the spot. The irony of the whole film is that it's not about fact so much for Indiana, but it's about truth. The film tends to be about, finding his relationship with his father again, connecting to his dad that he never really related to as a boy, and even, finding faith in God as The Last Crusade comes to an end. Now, I was in Bible school, and in Bible school, we were taught many things. We were taught how to read the Bible. We were taught theology. But lo and behold, in one of my classes, I was told that X marks the spot. Now, we didn't call it X. We called it chi, or some people pronounce the letter chi. It's the Greek letter, and it looks just like an X. And we were told that X marks the spot in some passages where the author has actually put two things on either side and left the central key to the whole passage right there in the middle. Now, if you read through the Psalms, you will sometimes find this done really nicely, and you'll have the first verse being the same as the last verse, and the second verse being as the second to the last verse, and slowly the author builds the poem so that what he really wants to tell you is right there in the middle. But sometimes it happens a little differently. What happens is the author writes two stories that are seemingly different, but you actually find out the same. But the only way you will know that is by reading a strange passage that's right there in the middle that seems to have no earthly reason to be there, but there it is. And that's what happens in Luke chapter 16. We have these two parables and then a bit in the middle. Now, the editors of my Bible were so sort of like confused about the passage in the middle that they actually called it additional teachings, right? Whenever I see additional teachings, I'm like, okay, they have no idea what to do with this section, so they just called it additional teachings. But Jesus, in the middle of Luke chapter 16, he doesn't just go off script. Luke didn't just, say, "Oh, I've got to put this somewhere," and just scribble some stuff down before he went to the next parable. It's there for a reason, and that's what I hope you guys will see before the end of this little talk. So let's get into the passage. If you have your Bibles in front of you, open to Luke chapter 16, and we're going to start at the beginning. And we have to remember that this whole conversation is happening with the Pharisees, okay? So Jesus is having a go at the Pharisees, at the religious establishment in this passage. You can see that right there in verse 14. The Pharisees who loved money heard all this, and they were sneering or mocking Jesus as he was saying these things. Okay, so what's the first section about? The first section is about he's called the shrewd manager in my Bible. He's a bit of a wise guy. He thinks he knows the ways of the world. And how does he do this? He has a rich boss, and he realizes that he's about to get fired, right? Anyone had those moments when you realize you're about to get fired? Okay. He realizes he's about to get fired, and instead of, owning up and going to his boss and saying, "Yeah, I deserve this," what does he do? He goes out to people that his boss should get money from, people who owe his boss money. He goes and he says, "Hey guys, you owe this much. Now rewrite the bill. You now owe this one. He re-releases an invoice to these people and says, now you owe less, so that he can get on their good side. And he does this with a couple of people so that when he leaves, he can, find a place to be or maybe a job or whatever it is, because he's created some goodwill out there. And Jesus, after telling this story, seems to compliment these people, right? He says here at the beginning, he says, the master commended the dishonest manager because he has acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. It seems as if Jesus in this sort of parable, this section, is saying like, hey, what this guy did was good. And I remember the first time I read this chapter in Luke, I was just like, what is going on? What this guy did was not good. It is messed up. We should not be telling people to do these things. But Jesus goes on to explain, right? And he says this, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with very much. Whoever is dishonest with little is dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? What Jesus is telling the people is that this parable is not actually entirely about money. It's about something else. In the second parable, which starts in verse 19, which is what we heard read earlier, is the story of the rich man and Lazarus. And Lazarus is a beggar sitting outside a rich man's house. Lazarus dies because he's just so poor and has nothing and is, ill and wounded. And the rich man ends up dying because, he still has tons of money, but he ends up dying. And there's this scene in the afterlife, okay, where the rich man is suffering and he's calling out to Lazarus, and he's saying, can somebody give me some water? And they say, no, you can't have any water. It won't help you. And going to your relatives won't help you because they have the Bible, right? And the Bible should have told them to not live the way that you lived, which is to not be the rich guy there and leaving the poor guy, suffering in front of your house. And so you would have thought, at a quick first read, that this is also about money, right? That Jesus is sort of having a go at rich people here. But the truth is, while they're both about money, the stories are centered on the issue of money, I don't think that the point that Jesus is trying to get across here is money at all. I think that the point that Jesus is trying to get across here is, in fact, idolatry. And he says that right in the middle between these two passages, starting in verse 13. No servant can serve two masters. Does anyone know Bob Dylan? Now we're really getting back here. This is ancient history here. Bob Dylan sang a song. You got to serve somebody. Might be the devil, might be the Lord, but you're going to serve somebody. Jesus would agree. Either he will hate the one and love the other, he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Both of these passages, while they talk about money and they use money as the frame for the story, what Jesus is trying to get across here in both of these stories is idolatry. He's trying to warn the people about idolatry. Earlier on, all of us sang Shema Yisrael, right? Hear, O Israel. Do you know, guys, why we sing Shema Yisrael right there at the beginning? We sing it because it's a warning. We sing it before we come to confession because it's a warning to all of us, right? Jewish people, we often forget this. I often forget it. Shema Yisrael was just something that we would say. We would say it, here and there, and people tell you that just before you die as a Jewish person, you're supposed to say, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. But the purpose there is not to sort of have it as a prayer or a mantra. The purpose of that passage, even in Deuteronomy, is a warning. And the warning is, and that's why it uses the imperative, hear, O Israel, listen to what I'm trying to tell you. God is the God of Israel. God is one. Right? Do not go serving other gods. Do not go being with other gods. That is the message of these passages. It's the message of the Shema, and it brings us to confession. So idolatry here is talked about in two different ways. The first way that Jesus talks about idolatry is saying that you cannot serve two masters, right? The very simple idea of you cannot have a thing that you worship, right? The simple idea of idolatry. When we think of idolatry, we might think back to the Old Testament. We think of stone idols or wooden idols, maybe even Hindus, people who sort of have like straight up idols in their homes, and they worship them or connect to them or meditate to them or whatever it is that they do with these idols. And that's sort of the first way that we think about idolatry. When I was a boy, I was told the story of Abe and the idol shop. Has anyone heard the story of Abe and the idol shop? Thank you, my brother. Abe and the idol shop. So Abraham, I was told as a young boy, had his dad called Terah. And Terah, apparently, according to Jewish tradition, owned an idol shop. He sold idols. And Abe, one day, goes into the idol shop and decides to teach his dad a lesson about idolatry. So he gets a stick, goes into the idol shop, and smashes all of the idols except for one. And when his dad, Terah, comes home, he goes, "Abraham, what have you done? You smashed all the idols." And Abe said, "I didn't smash the idols. That idol over there got angry with all the other idols, and so he destroyed them." Right? And Terah goes, "What, you think I am stupid? Yeah, it's an idol. He can't destroy anything." And Abraham goes, "Aha! So you acknowledge that it's just an idol, so why do you pray to it?" Right? Jewish wisdom right there. And you're like, okay, that's like simple idolatry. Yeah, the idea that we don't pray to stones. And we should learn something from idolatry, because even this kind of simple idea of idolatry is something that happens to us. Service is something that allows us to test whether we are actually in idolatry or not. And here are some of the questions that I use in my life when I ask myself, am I getting into idolatry? Here are some of the questions. Number one, what do I do with my time? Yeah? What do I do with my time? Yeah? How am I spending my time? If I'm spending a lot of time on money, if I'm spending a lot of time on this or that, football, yeah? Anyone want to confess football? Football, whatever it might be, if I'm spending a lot of time, I've got to ask myself, is this something that I am serving? Yeah? Is it money? Right? The wise guy at the beginning, he was clearly serving money, and so God was speaking about it. Thought. Yeah? How much time do I spend thinking about something? How much time does something whirl around in my head? The things that take up our time, the things that take up our thought, these are the things that we are serving. And we have to ask ourselves the question, why have I allowed this or that to become an idol in my life? But the second picture of idolatry that we have in this passage is the really bizarre section that most people really don't know what to do with. And it's verse 18. So if you're looking by verse 18 in Luke chapter 16 says this. After he's talked about the preaching of the kingdom of God is being preached, everyone is forcing his way into it. It's easier for heaven and earth to disappear than one stroke of the law. So he's talking clearly about the idolatry we see throughout the Old Testament. But then he says this, anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery. The man who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Now, did Jesus just go, oh, hang on a second, I need to tell you this thing about adultery, and then rush back to the other parable? No. He's speaking about this subject because the most used metaphor for adultery in the entire Old Testament is for idolatry in the Old Testament is adultery, right? Adultery is the way God looks at idolatry, right? That's it. He sees it as you betraying him, betraying the covenant, betraying the relationship, betraying the connection that you have with him by just going off and being with someone else. Yeah? That's the way that he sees it. And so this verse Yeah, and we're not going to get into remarriage and all of those things. This verse, I think, is there not to speak about anything else, but to speak about idolatry. Speak about the way that Jesus, that God, looks at the way we relate to other things when we don't relate to him. And so when I think about my relationship with God as a marriage, when I think about it as a genuine, real relationship that I have committed to and I am in, whether I like it or not, really, that relationship, I have to think about, am I committing adultery? And so the questions for my idolatry test change. And the question really comes, and these are the scarier ones for me, I ask myself, what am I afraid of losing? What in my life, if I lost it, if it stopped, if it ended, would just leave me useless, would just leave me like with nothing? What's the scariest thought that comes to my mind? If something goes wrong in my life, what do I do? Who do I call? Who do I go to? What relationship do I see as first? These are the questions that I ask myself when I'm looking for idolatry in my life. And funnily enough, one of the idols that I find most common in my life can sometimes be my family, my marriage. Yeah? I think to myself, losing them I would just be nothing. And I have to question, who is it that I go to? Who is my comfort? Who is my safe place? Who is that person? Is it God? Because that's what he's asking for. That's the connection. That's the relationship he's looking for. Jesus, when he comes to idolatry, doesn't just talk about stone idols and bits of wood. Jesus, when he talks about idolatry, as usual, he raises the bar and makes it real. That's what Jesus wants to do when he talks about idolatry. He wants it to be very real for you. What are you doing? Who are you serving? So how do we come to this problem, right? Because if I just look at idolatry and think about my life, all I'm left with is guilt. I'm just left feeling terrible. So how are we supposed to come to this? So there are 3 different ways to come to this. The first way, I think, is the way of the relativist. The relativist comes to this issue, and the relativist, above all things, prizes freedom. Hey, look, man, I'm going to do what I want. Nothing controls me. Nothing tells me what to do. I'm just going to do my thing, and that's the way that I live my life. But the minute, as you guys know, the minute you say, nothing controls me, I'm just going to do what I want, it's pretty clear who controls you, right? And it's your desires. And your desires will drag you further and further and further, and you will go from desiring something to being addicted to it. And there is nothing that takes away freedom more from people than addiction. And I'm not just talking the regular addictions of, drugs or alcohol, pornography, addictions that are ruining our societies all over the world. I'm talking about all the other addictions as well. Relationships can be addicting. Novelty can be addicting. We always want to do something new, something different. Travel is addicting. I always need to be somewhere else. The grass is always greener on another side, and so I've got to keep moving. Things just drag us, and we become obsessed, and we get addicted to them because there's no such thing as being just free without law, without rules. And so that brings us to the next reaction that we can have to idolatry, and that is religion, right? There's the relativist, and then there's religion. And the religious reaction to idolatry is, okay, I know how to deal with this, don't worry. We need some rules, okay? We just need to set up some rules. We need some walls, we need some boundaries, let's set them up. Okay, you're not allowed to do this, or to do that, or to do this, or to do that. And brothers and sisters, as a former Orthodox Jew, I can tell you that religion, again, leaves you nowhere. Because no matter what rules we set up as human beings, we break them. Yeah? There are no set of rules that we can form, that we can write down on a piece of paper, that we will not break ourselves, pretty quickly. It's a spiritual situation. It's called sin. We all deal with it, and that's the way that we live our lives. It was funny, actually. On the way coming here this morning, I was at Landwehr in Florentine, and I was, remembering my days as an Orthodox Jew as I was getting ready to come here, and I saw this Orthodox family walking down from the synagogue on their way home. And, you know, the dad's got this big sort of prayer shawl, and he's with his adult kids, and they're all sort of walking down from synagogue. And one thing you're not supposed to do on Shabbat, by the way, is do anything with money. Yeah? You're not supposed to get near money, connect with money, talk about money. Why? Because that's what you do 6 days of the week. On the seventh day, you're supposed to not do anything like that at all. And it was very funny as I saw them walk down the road, and they went, there was like an estate agent's, yeah? And they went straight to the estate agent's that's opposite Landwell, and stood there and talked about the price of the houses, and they were saying about whether they could afford it or not. And I'm not saying this to mock them, right? I'm just saying it's just what we do, right? We can set up rules, but the rules never work. They just leave us feeling guilty. They just leave us feeling hopeless because we never meet even our own standards. So religion's not going to work. Relativism is not going to work. The only answer, I believe, is the gospel. And the gospel does not answer this problem with, hey, just do whatever you want. And it does not answer the problem with rules. The gospel answers the problem with relationship. The gospel answers the problem by saying, you are an idolater. You are an idolater. That's it. You are an idolater. But I am God. And when you started committing idolatry right there in the garden, yeah, you started setting yourself up and other things up as more important than me, I didn't abandon you. God does not abandon us idolaters. He didn't reject us, but he spoke to us through Moses and the prophets, as Lazarus and Abraham tell the rich man that speaks to us. He speaks to us through Moses. He spoke to us through the prophets with patience, with kindness, with stern words and soft words. He tried to get through to us, telling us that this is the way and this is the path, and we didn't listen. But did he abandon us? No, not even then. Jesus comes and says, no, even though you're idolaters, I'm going to come and die for you. I will die as an idolater. I will take all of your idolatry and all of your misguided living and thinking, and I will take it upon myself, and I will die for you so that you can know God. Brothers and sisters, the only way for us to find a way out of idolatry is to be pulled from in front of that truck, to be grabbed from next to the fire, for us to know that we are saved, not by our doing, but by God. Not by what we have achieved, but by grace. It's the only way. If we remember him and focus on him, on what he has done for us, how could I go to anyone else? He has the words of life. Jesus is the only one that can give us the way by the relationship that we have with him. So does X marks the spot? Not so much. But the cross does. The cross marks the spot for your thoughts. It is the way that if you focus on him and remember on him and think about him, allow him to consume your time and your thoughts. Let him be the one that you go to when you are afraid. And idolatry will slip away. Because how could I desire anything else but he who saved me, even though I was committing adultery with someone else? Amen.